Imagine you work aboard a massive space-venturing cargo ship, and one day you wake up to a massive explosion, and the sounds of sirens blaring as you make your way to the nearest escape pod. And as you make your way down to the planet below, the rough re-entry causes a panel to dislodge and knock you out cold. Upon waking up, you find that your life pod is on fire, and after putting it out, you slowly make your way up the ladder, only to find you've crash-landed on an alien planet, and you are completely surrounded by nothing but water. And the ship that you were just on has now crashed into its surface. You are now completely alone in an alien world with no way to escape.
Welcome aboard, Captain.
Hello, my name's Sam McCausland, and today I'll be talking about the hit video game Subnautica. Let's just dive right in.
Subnautica's development started in 2013. The team at Unknown Worlds had just released Natural Selection 2 the previous year, and although the game was quite successful, the team wanted to move on to something new, as the development cycle for Natural Selection 2 was 8 whole years. Unfortunately, around the same time was a real-life tragedy, and due to this, the developers wanted to move away from such a violence and gun-focused game, and move on to something more fundamentally creative. One of the main inspirations was Minecraft and how it manages to be a game with non-linear progression and limitless freedom. Originally, the game was intended to be set in space, but at the time there were already many games both released and in development with that same concept around the same time, so the developers decided to have the game take place entirely underwater. This was intriguing to the developers as at the time there wasn't really any similar games available, so it gave them a possibility of crafting a wholly new experience that would separate themselves from the competition. The founding principle of the game early on was the fear of the unknown, although the first few builds of the game were very bare bones, just a submarine and a procedurally generated map. This was actually something the developers wanted to experiment with before eventually deciding that it was too obvious that the train was not made by a human, so they decided that for the next builds to take place in the same handcrafted map for every player. The first build of the game that is recognizable to the final product had the Aurora as just a PNG in the distance, to add some flavor to the skybox. But the developers found that the majority of players attempted to swim towards it, as it was the only thing that they could easily see from anywhere on the map. So instead of deleting it, the developers decided to fully model it, and in later builds of the game even allowed you to explore its interior. The developers wanted to continue developing the game for 2 years before releasing the minimal viable as an early access game. But unfortunately, the team completely ran out of money, so they were forced to release the game in its current state. This ended up being a blessing in disguise, as the developers admit that the game would have taken a completely different path without the fan feedback they got during the early access. Once released into early access, the game only had an estimated shelf life of 2 months, unless they could get the sales up. Thankfully, the game managed to maintain a steady player base for long enough that a few prominent YouTubers got their hands on the game. This gave a decent boost in sales, which allowed the game to continue its development. One of the most useful aspects of the early access development model is that it allowed the developers to get a large amount of feedback on everything that's added, using the feedback menu in-game. The menu allows players to upload a screenshot along with text and an emotion face ranging from happy to sad. This system was inspired by the happy or not feedback buttons found across the UK. Another important aspect of the feedback system is that every post includes the player's in-game coordinates, which allows the developers to generate a heat map of both negative and positive areas from every player. This allows the developers to both know where the majority of people are encountering problems, but also generally where players are more likely to head during the game, and how to gate items with progression by placing better items further from the player heat map. The feedback system also allowed the developers to graph how players are reacting to each update. One of the main ideas that the developers did not want to budge on, however, was the fact that the game would not include any weapons, even though a large portion of the player feedback was asking for ways to fight back. This was one thing that the developers refused to change their mind on, and it ended up being integral to how the game makes the player feel like they are at the bottom of the food chain. If you've played the game recently, you probably know that one of the main ways that they achieve this is with the hostile Leviathan class creatures, but these iconic behemoths were almost not added to the game. Originally, the developers had no plans to add any hostile or scary creatures, but after they decided to experiment with the docile reefback Leviathan, they saw a huge amount of positive player feedback, as many Let's Players got really freaked out by the huge creatures and their eerie sounds. The developers also realized around this point that their initial idea of the fear of the unknown could only excite players if there was actually something to fear in the unknown, and that the large leviathans would be a perfect terror in the dark. This led to the creation of many of the most iconic creatures in the game, such as the sea dragon leviathan, ghost leviathan, crab squid, and of course the iconic reaper leviathan, a threat so fear-inducing that generated huge reactions from Let's Players, and this became a huge selling point for the game, which would never even been added if not for the player feedback. But of course, the game could not stay in early access forever, and on the 23rd of January 2018, the beta was closed and the game entered its full release. The game had changed a lot throughout its development, and one of the main aspects that was consistently added onto was the game's story, and I think now is a good time to go over it. So let's dive in, shall we? In the game, you play as Riley Robinson, who doesn't have much of a story. All we know is that he was a non-essential systems maintenance chief aboard the Aurora. He also happens to be an example of a silent protagonist. This aspect in the story actually works extremely well, as it allows the player to immerse themselves in the character, which allows for the game to feel a whole lot scarier. While working on the Aurora, a massive explosion hit the starboard side of the ship while attempting a slingshot maneuver around planet 4546b while on its way to a terraforming mission. We don't know exactly what Riley was doing, but we do know that he made his way to the portside life pods, as due to the impact all of the starboard life pods are put out of commission. After climbing his way into life pod 5, he ejects from the ship and makes his way down to the planet below. After finding yourself alone on an alien planet, the player will most likely begin gathering resources, as the first main objective the game lays out for you is to repair the life pod's secondary systems by crafting a repair tool, which requires cave sulfur. This pushes the player to explore the nearby caves, where they will inevitably encounter the crash fish. A fish that seemingly has one objective: to scream and swim as quickly towards you as it can before kamikazing and blowing you up along with it. This will be the first of many scares that the player will have to face in the game, but if the player musters up enough courage to head back towards the crashfish's nest, they will find the cave sulfur they have been looking for. This is an example of the game's attitude towards creatures, as other than the small fish, which can be cooked or turned into water in the case of the bladderfish, killing creatures does not give you any usable resources. Instead, you can observe the creature's behavior and exploit it. Other examples include grabbing stalker teeth when they break off, and gas sacks from gasopod farts. After crafting the repair tool, the player can fix the secondary systems, which turns the lights back on in the life pod. It also allows the player to repair the built-in radio, which delivers the player a message informing them that they will be stuck for 9 hours. The mission to gain a repair tool also plays a secondary important role, as it is used to repair vehicles later in the game. But if it was given no use at the start of the game, players who crafted it would feel as if they've wasted time and resources, and players who don't craft it until they get a vehicle may not know how they are supposed to repair their vehicle. But not just is repairing the radio a way to get the players to craft the repair tool early on, but it also begins sending distress calls from other life pods. This is an ingenious way that the developers naturally push players further from their life pod, while also expanding on the story and lore by giving information about other survivors, their jobs in the Aurora, and how they are coping with the situation before their inevitable death. This also gives the player even more of a feeling of isolation, as every single distress call that they answer just seems to lead to death. But of course, if the developers didn't give the players an incentive to venture towards distress beacons, after going to one or two, the players would begin to just ignore them. So the developers made sure to place a data download at each pod. Data downloads are one of the two main ways that players will be able to gain blueprints, the other being fragments, which can be found mostly in wrecks, which are often strategically placed nearby to life pods as another incentive for players to venture towards them. But wrecks are not just a way to gain blueprints, as due to them being pieces of the Aurora that dislodged during the crash, they also play a key role in developing the lore, as you can find PDAs that explain more about the Aurora and its parent company, Alterra. Speaking of the Aurora, After roughly 40 minutes of gameplay, the Aurora's drive core goes critical and causes a massive explosion that damages the entire ship and blows the front clean open. At this point, the player is given the blueprint for a radiation suit. And shortly after this, the radio will go off and you will get a call from Second Officer Keen, informing survivors about a rendezvous at dry land. Unfortunately, the coordinates are corrupted, but the transmission origin is still intact. Due to the possibility of finding survivors being so promising with the idea of a rendezvous point, it is likely the player will make this their main objective and begin constructing a sea moth to go deep enough to reach the life pod. On the way to the signal origin, the player will go through the sparse reef, a great example of how the game uses lighting and sound to create an unsettling atmosphere, as even though there are little to no living creatures in the sparse reef, the creepy vibes are enough to put any player on edge. If the player is able to overcome their fears and make it to the life pod, they will find the final transmission between Officer Keen and the captain.
Keen, this is Aurora, come in. This is Keen. Life pod detached to OK planet fall in 30 seconds. The computer has identified a landmass at the attached coordinates. I want you to regroup the crew there. Understood, but they are your responsibility now. Don't let them down. Captain, you need to evacuate. Negative. You'll need the ship in one piece if you're going to contact HQ on the long range. I'm attempting a controlled descent. Captain!
This conversation explains how the ship was still intact after landing. Along with the transmission is the promised coordinates to dry land, which is close to the life pod but all the way up on the surface. As the player gets close to the rendezvous location, they will notice the entire island is suspended on the surface by giant ancient floaters, similar to the ones found in the starting area. After dodging falling rocks, the player can maneuver their Seamoth into a pool in the middle of the island, where they will find a lone PDA on the ground.
We have to board the Aurora, repair the long-range comms, make contact with the other survivors. We can't be the only two that made it.
Those are not the orders the captain gave me, and they are not the orders I'm giving you.
This isn't chain of command, it's survival.
My obligations as acting commander don't turn on their convenience. Get out of the water.
If I get into trouble, I'll send you my coordinates.
I can't let you go alone.
Then come with me.
You don't leave me much choice.
Received emergency transmission from Second Officer Keen, 2 hours after last activity.
Rendezvous was a failure. Intercepted a transmission from Altera HQ. Seems they sent a data package to the Aurora. We were intercepted by a Leviathan-class predator before we could reach the ship. Consider the CTO and I lost at sea. Be safe. Keen, out.
Unfortunately, once again, there is no signs of intelligent life left on this planet. But there is something interesting, as on arrival to the island, your PDA says something intriguing.
Picking up multiple energy signatures on the island's surface.
If the player chooses to explore the island and look into this information, they will find these structures. But they don't look like they were built by any Aurora survivors. They look way too old and worn. Could there be any other people here? Well, if the player explored enough wrecks, they may have come across a PDA log about a secret secondary mission for the Aurora. This is the beginning of a secondary storyline of a previous ship that also crashed onto this planet in a similar way, which seems to hint that there may be more going on here. The Degassi crew survivors include Paul Torgal and his son Bart Torgal, along with the mercenary Marguerite Maida, who was hired by Paul to protect them on their voyage. After crash landing on the planet, they made their way to the floating island and constructed a temporary base. But not long into their stay, heavy rainfall forced them to find a new location, which is then marked as a signal on your PDA. There was also a PDA entry from Bart, which seems to have been made after all of the others, as he talks about how his father and Marguerite died.
This is the first time I've seen sunlight in months. After all that time in the deep, I'd been dreaming of it. Now that I'm back here, I'm finding it hard to enjoy alone. Father was right. We should never have left this place. We shouldn't have gone so deep. They do not want us down there. Despite my best efforts, ill health is taking hold of me. The visions are getting worse. Marguerite and Father are now part of the ecosystem of this incredible planet. It's reassuring to know that when I go, I'll join them. Until then, well, there's always the view.
This is an intriguing entry and may push the player to look further into the Degassi story and try and figure out what happened to them. The new signal location is close to the life pod, so it's likely at this point that the player will head back there, where upon their arrival, there will most likely be a new radio transmission. But instead of a survivor, this transmission is from the trading ship named Sunbeam that intercepted the Aurora distress signal, and after a few more transmissions, they decide to head to the planet and hopefully rescue any survivors. The last transmission also includes coordinates for a landing spot and an estimated time of arrival. This will then become the player's new #1 priority, as this is possibly the only chance that they have of getting off the planet. But as they approach the landing site island, the player will discover a large alien structure. It doesn't look like anything Altera has built, but with how little time is left, most players will just wait for the sunbeam before exploring. But unfortunately...
Touching down in 10, 9, 8. It's coming from the building? Change course. Set thrusters to full.
And all hopes of escape are completely dashed as the sunbeam explodes into a million tiny pieces. Now what? Well, I guess I could explore the massive alien building that turned out to be a huge rail cannon. Upon entering the facility, it becomes apparent that whatever race that built this is no longer present, as the building is deathly quiet. After translating a few alien data pads, the player learns that the building is designated as the Quarantine Enforcement Platform, and that there are other facilities at far deeper levels. But why is it called the Quarantine Enforcement Platform? And what exactly is its purpose? Well, all is revealed when the player attempts to access the building's control terminal. The building refuses shutdown, and it states that
The control panel is broadcasting a message. Translation reads, "Warning, infected individuals may not disable the weapon. This planet is under quarantine."
it is at this point that the player is advised to complete a self-scan, after which it is revealed that the player is infected with an unknown disease. It also becomes apparent at this point that the Quarantine Enforcement Platform is the thing that shot down the Aurora. Now the only lead that the player has to a possible cure to the infection and the ability to shut down the Quarantine Enforcement Platform is the Disease Research Facility, located at a depth of 800 meters, which far exceeds the Seamoth's crush depth. This is a very natural progression gate, as it makes sense in the lore of the game. To upgrade the Seamoth, the player will need to build a vehicle upgrade console, which requires a moon pool, so it's at this point in the game that the player really should build a base if they haven't already, using the Habitat Builder tool. While gathering resources for the upgrades, it's likely the player will venture towards the second Degassi base, due to its proximity to the Jellyshroom Caves, which is a great location for finding the material magnetite. It's once again apparent that this habitat was also abandoned a long time ago, and within there is more information about where the Degassi went next, and how they also began developing symptoms for the disease, and why they ventured deeper to hopefully find a cure to the disease and figure out what shot down their ship. If the player follows the new signal location, which is at a depth of 500 meters, they will find the final Degassi base, which is guarded by a large crab squid, a terrifying enemy that can disable electronics with its EMP blast. But if the player can sneak past it, they will find a section of the base has been torn open, the reason for which is explained in a nearby PDA.
I have had it with you, risking our lives.
Oh, stow it, Chief. The kid can't kill this disease without fish to study. I'm just bringing him home.
What? Tell her. Tell her I'm right.
You're both wrong. Marguerite, I can't find out how they resist the bacteria if you slaughter them all.
It ain't always they oblige in coming in alive.
He means you're being reckless.
Father, the outcome's no better if we hole up in here and don't go outside. That we have to find a middle way.
There is no compromise. Not while she's on my sea base.
Your sea base?
I'm going outside.
Bart, Torgal has disembarked the habitat.
Bart, come in. It's dangerous. Damn it, boy. I know you can hear me.
Chief, get off the radio and put on your helmet.
What?
Brace!
The This is the final entry from the Degassi, besides Paul's final entry, showing that even they were not able to find a way to heal themselves from the disease. But there still is hope, as the Degassi base is directly next to the entrance of a brand new biome, the Lost River. Upon entering this biome, the aptly named song Lost River begins to play. This does an excellent job at setting the mood, as the ominous choir and humming synths build a sense of mystery and dread. While navigating through the corridors, the player will eventually come across the previously mentioned disease research facility. But it seems to have been heavily damaged, and after exploring it becomes apparent that this facility was used by the precursors to attempt to cure the Kara bacterial disease that had been threatening their species. They discovered a few creatures that produce enzymes that could be used to cure the infection, but while attempting to study the egg of one of these creatures, its mother rammed the facility, which ended up releasing one infected specimen, which allowed the infection to spread into the ecosystem. After this, the planet was put under emergency quarantine, and all individuals were evacuated to off-site sanctuaries. While exploring the facility, the player comes across a construction line for a creature known as the Warper, which was designed to hunt any creatures found infected with the bacterium, which also explains the mysterious transmissions that the player got throughout the game.
Playing partially translated broadcast.
9 new biological subjects designated. Mode. Hunting. Analyzing. Sharing subject locations with other agents.
After interacting with this terminal, the player begins to enter the final stages of the infections, as large pustules appear on the player's skin. Now that the research facility lead has come up as a dud, there isn't much to do other than find and investigate the thermal power plant, and hopefully locate the primary containment facility. But due to the fact that the thermal plant is located at a depth of 1,200 meters, the Seamoth's max crush depth is way too shallow to make it down there, so the player will need to head back and fabricate a new form of traversal. Upon arrival back at the player's base, they will find another radio transmission, this time from Altera HQ.
This is Altera HQ. This may be your only communications window. We can't send a rescue ship all the way out there, so Aurora, you're just gonna have to meet us halfway. We've uploaded blueprints to the ship's computer.
Sandwich run, you in?
Yeah, give me a second. Black box data shows the high security terminal in the captain's quarters is still functional. The code should be 2679.
Now, it's finally time to head back into the crash, where everything started. There was a large opening at the front of the ship ever since the explosion, so now is the perfect time to finally head inside and explore what is left of the ship. After making their way deep into the bowels of the behemoth, the player will find the Aurora drive core, and will be prompted by the PDA to repair any breaches to stop the radiation leaking into the environment. After fixing each breach and fighting off the most annoying creatures in the game, the player is successful in stopping the destruction of the ecosystem and can move on to find the captain's quarters, which will take the player through the prawn suit bay, where they will be able to synthesize the full blueprint, which is important as the prawn suit can go much deeper than the Seamoth. Once the player reaches the captain's quarter, they will find a datapad with the blueprints for the Neptune escape rocket, which will be added to the player's PDA. Once the blueprint is gained, the player is free to construct a prawn suit and the Cyclops if the player has found all of the necessary fragments at this point, and then they will venture deep into the molten core of the planet. Upon entering the inactive lava zone, one of 3 songs will begin playing, either Ahead Slow, Bring a Med Pack, or Fear the Reapers. Each of these songs do an incredible job building the atmosphere, along with the dark lighting, which is due to the fact that the lava zone is located so deep underground that the only light source is the lava below, which also means that it is very difficult to see, which makes the ominous roaring all the more scary. And as you make your way towards the large open area of the lava zone, the silhouette of the imposing lava castle begins to emerge, along with its 2 protectors, the giant sea dragon leviathans. The same creature whose skeleton is located within the Lost River, and they are still alive and ready to attack. If you're smart, you may power off your sub and continue onward with your sea glider prawn suit, as they are far more nimble, and the creatures in the games are attracted to loud noises, and the Cyclops is very loud. If you are able to sneak past the sea dragons, you will find a precursor entrance carved into the volcanic structure. And when the player begins to venture into the caves, the music track aptly titled Lava Castle will begin to play. Easily one of the most ominous and fear-inducing songs in the game, which begins with the startling noise of metal clanking as it transitions into what sounds like water filtering with a thumping bass, which sounds awfully similar to an accelerated heartbeat. This begins to blur the line between diegetic and non-diegetic sound, as it's hard to tell whether the sounds are coming from the world or just the music, which helps build an atmosphere of dread as the player navigates their way towards the alien thermal power plant. When entering the power plant, the player can find a blue tablet key behind a force field. After opening and gaining access to the brand new tablet, the player will get a psychic transmission begging you to
come here to me.
There was another similar transmission earlier in the game, but this is the first hint we have that the signal may be originating from nearby. It might possibly be coming from the primary containment facility, as there is a data pad which includes information about the containment facility's location, which appears to be directly below the thermal plant. When the player finds the entrance to the lower level of the lava zone, they will be confronted by a massive lake of lava with an imposing alien structure, the fabled primary containment facility, guarded by yet another sea dragon leviathan. As the player enters the facility, they will be greeted with a large open room that has 8 entrances. The player will find that 4 of them have arch portal gates that teleport the player all across the map, and 3 of the other 4 have information about the facility, including a dissection lab which is attempting to gather an enzyme produced by another, even larger leviathan, one so large that the databank has to adjust its size categories upward to even include such a large specimen. One that is contained within the facility, in a large aquarium below. The precursors were attempting to hatch one of the eggs, as due to the mother's age, the enzyme it produces is not concentrated enough, so the only way to develop a cure is acquiring it from their young. But for some reason the eggs are unable to hatch, and even after removing the specimen from one of the eggs, it still won't produce a cure. One of the other rooms includes part of a large pipe network that stretches across the entire map. This explains how the ecosystem of the planet is still alive, as the weakened form of the cure was spread across the planet by peeperfish through the vents that are used to supply the facility with clean water. After learning all this, it's hard to tell whether the Emperor Leviathan will be passive or aggressive, and whether it'll even be able to help. Well, there's only one way to find out. It turns out that the psychic messages you've been getting throughout the game originate from this creature, as it is an extremely intelligent life form that is able to speak using telepathy. She explains to the player that the previous inhabitants tried to force her to hatch her eggs, and how they went against nature's flow, and then she asks you if you go with the current or fight against it. Afterwards, she reveals yet another warp gate and asks you to let her young roam free, which the player agrees to by opening the gate, after which the player is given the recipe for the hatching enzymes, something that the Emperor refused to divulge to the precursors, but is now willing to bestow upon you. The recipe for the enzyme requires natural materials from all across the planet. Thankfully, this structure is a teleportation hub, which makes the goal a whole lot easier. And after gathering a sea crown from the aquarium, a bulbish sample from the bulb zone, an eye stack from the crag field, a ghostweed from the Lost River, and finally a fungal sample from the mushroom forest, the player can synthesize these into the hatching enzymes, which the player can insert into the hatching station, which finally allows the eggs to hatch and the babies to play with their mother. Immediately after hatching, the babies begin producing concentrated enzyme 42, the cure for the infection, which the player can interact with and finally cure themselves for good. Afterwards, the player can leave the mother as she finally decides that it is now her time to pass on, and that her race can continue through her children. Then the babies make their way through the portal to spread the cure across the planet. Luckily, the portal just so happens to lead back to the quarantine enforcement platform, which is perfect, as now because the player is cured, they can make their way back to the control room and finally shut down the weapon. Now there is nothing to stop the player leaving the planet, and they can finally begin construction on the Neptune escape rocket. And section by section they can build it up until finally.
tune one rocket online.
It is complete, and the player can wave goodbye to their pet cuttlefish and prepare the rocket for takeoff. One of the things the player must do is prepare a time capsule. These are items that include a screenshot, text, and a handful of items. The player can customize their own one to be found by other players during their playthroughs, which is a cool feature that helps bring the community around the game together. And finally, after setting everything up, the player can launch towards the stars.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Upon exiting the atmosphere, the ship is confronted by the Aurora's debris field. Thankfully, the ship is equipped with a shield generator and is able to force its way through. But during the maneuver, a panel dislodges, which is a nice callback to the beginning of the game. But thankfully, the ship is okay and begins a slingshot maneuver around the planet, during which the player looks towards a large ice patch. This is a subtle tease for the DLC turned sequel / spin-off that was in the works, Below Zero. But before the player can get a good look, the ship enters some form of warp speed and begins its journey back to the Altera homeworld. But before the game cuts to credits, the player gets one last psychic transmission from the Emperor Leviathan.
What is a wave without the ocean? A beginning without an end. They are different, but they go together. Now you go among the stars, and I fall among the sand. We are different, but we go together.
And that's the ending. I personally think it is one of the best endings for a survival game, especially because most of them don't even have a proper ending. But I think I should probably talk more about that in my review. Speaking of which...
Now, I'm a little bit biased because Subnautica is one of my top 5 favorite games of all time. So I'll be going over what other review sites have given the game before I get into my personal review. And we're going to start off with everyone's favorite review site, IGN. Yay! Lena Hafer, one of their journalists, gave the game a 9.1, which means absolutely nothing because nobody cares what IGN thinks about anything.
Moving on to something better, on IMDb, the game has managed to gain a score of 8.4, with over 2.2 thousand reviews, with the majority of the reviews being a 10, with each lower review being less and less. And on Metacritic, they have compiled 39 critic reviews and ended up with a score of 87, and an 8.6 based on 1,912 user reviews. And finally on Steam, probably the most important metric, the game has achieved the coveted overwhelmingly positive rating, with 277,000 user reviews. So it's fair to say that the game is quite well regarded, so I hope you will excuse me gushing over every aspect of the game, which will start now. Subnautica is easily the best survival game I have ever played, as it's one of the only ones that has a proper story, as pretty much every other survival game either doesn't have one or only has one as an afterthought. For example, Minecraft, which as previously mentioned was one of the main inspirations for Subnautica, has no real story to speak of, and its ending is not really built up to, which makes sense as the main point of the game is building and exploring. Whereas in Subnautica, the main objective is to continue the story, as it's the game's main focus for the majority of its playtime. And from the beginning of the game, the player knows that their final goal is to leave the planet, but the game is able to include its whole story within the journey to succeed in that goal. But yet, they don't dumb down the survival aspects to fit its structure, as is some of the most intuitive survival and crafting systems I have ever seen. For example, the inventory system. Although there isn't really any way to make a perfect inventory management system, as inventory is always going to be an inherently annoying system that is required for game balance, but Subnautica still manages to have a pretty intuitive system, as there are no stacks of items and recipes usually require less materials than other games. Plus, the game automatically sorts all items, so you do not have to worry about constantly opening up your inventory to organize the items you just picked up. And another way the game simplifies its crafting systems is by having a small amount of resources the player needs to worry about, and each resource can be found from a specific harvesting node, making it easy to remember where you need to look to find more of it. And all plants can be regrown in grow beds at the player's base, allowing for harvesting of plant materials to become much less of a hassle as you progress. The only issue is that the inventory is quite small, and you can often run out of room, but I find this makes me engage more with the game, as I need to make sure to empty my inventory before a resource run to whatever biome I need to go to. Also, the lockers can be quite a hassle if you don't organize everything from the start of the game, so if you haven't played the game, I would highly recommend labeling each of your storage lockers as soon as possible to avoid headaches later on in the game. One of the best aspects about the game's open nature to how you can play through it is that many players love completely different playstyles. For example, I enjoy the terror of the game, and I often venture into the dangerous sections of the games to give myself a fright. And when it comes to the Leviathans, I like to build bases near them so that I can observe them from the safety of my home. Whereas my friend Noah, for example, well, I'll just let him tell you.
Hi, my name's Noah, and I play Subnautica very differently than Sam. Start off, Sam makes bases to observe Leviathans. I make bases just to walk around and have a dander and collect resources. I guess just play it more like a survival game. I don't really like getting frightened by Leviathans. I like to try and stay out their way and avoid them where possible, because, well, I don't want to fall off my chair. And then I suppose the biggest difference is that when I am really fed up with dealing a Leviathan, I kill it. So yeah, basically I use something called a stasis rifle. It freezes things, essentially. So I freeze a Leviathan in place, and then I basically use these things called gas pods. Yes, I know this sounds like a war crime, but I basically then just gas it to death, and that's very efficient. You can take it out in a couple of seconds. Earlier on, I used like little gas torpedoes that you can make and did it that way. That took a long time. I killed the Ghost Leviathan Juvenile above the Gargantuan skeleton because I wanted to make a base in its ribcage. I killed a Reaper Leviathan in front of the Aurora. I killed a Reaper Leviathan in the dunes. And then, what else? I killed a Ghost Leviathan adult in the Grand Reef because I just wanted to kill it, I wanted to scan it basically. And then, because I just really wanted to kill a sea dragon, I killed a sea dragon. I mean, they don't respawn, so they're out of my hair and I don't have to worry about them anymore, basically, so yeah.
And there are plenty more examples. A great one is speedrunning. There are many different categories for this game. The main three are any %, creative any %, and glitchless any %. One of my favourite runners is Salvner, as during his record attempts he is able to explain exactly what he is doing and how it will affect his run, which is insanely impressive multitasking. The game is quite popular to speedrun because of the fact that the game is set in the same world for each playthrough with random resource spawns. This makes the game much less luck-based than other survival games, which are usually completely procedurally generated. As I mentioned previously, I enjoy making bases in Subnautica. I am currently attempting to make one in every biome in the game. The reason I have the motivation to do so is because of the game's excellent base building mechanics. Whereas other games have very complex building mechanics which may be overwhelming and it can be hard to make your base even look good if you're creative enough, that is not the case however with Subnautica, as instead of constructing bases block by block or with walls and roofs, the game instead has pre-built rooms which you can attach onto one another, which makes a lot of sense as this is usually how underwater bases are actually constructed in real life. This allows for basically any base you build to look visually appealing, but the game does still allow for personalization with furniture, windows and posters found across the game. And of course, the Markiplier doll.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome back to Subnautica.
But as I mentioned many times, the most impactful part of the game is its fear and terror aspects, and I have to say the game definitely succeeds in this aspect, as I've been scared in this game more than I have in any actual horror game I've ever played.
So what is it? Oh,
What? Oh,
But it's not just the scares that instills me with fear, as so much of the game's atmosphere is genuinely terrifying. From the Blood Kelp Zone to the dunes, there are so many eerie spots on this planet. Even the first time the game turns to night is absolutely terrifying, as every noise that during the day was ignored, there is now no way to know what is even making them. And finally, I am going to give the game its Sam Cosland review score. Trademark. For the story, I give the game a 9 out of 10. I think it's an incredibly interesting story with deep lore hidden under the surface, pun 100% intended. And for the gameplay, I give it about a 9.5 out of 10. Although there are a few small issues, I still keep coming back to the game, as I've beaten it over 5 times now at this point, simply due to how engaging the progression system is. And finally, for the music and art direction, I give the game a 10 out of 10. As previously mentioned, the atmosphere that the graphics and music are able to create are truly something special and terrifying.
And without further ado, my final score for the game is a 10 out of 10. I personally don't believe there's such a thing as a perfect game, and although this game may have some problems, I really think this is as close as you're gonna get. My name's been Sam McCausland, and thank you for watching.